Hello, friends. Today, I have come up with an important lecture on biological productivity and energy transfer. This lecture is a part of the biological oceanography. So, without any further delay, let us start. When we talk about the biological productivity and energy transfer, it means we are talking about an ecosystem in the oceans where there are some organisms
the getting instant energy means this organic matter is stored. So the rate at which energy is stored by organism in organic and how this organic matter is formed. So this organic matter is formed by rate at which it is stored by organism in organic matter using energy derived from derived from solar radiation during photosynthesis. Synthesis. Or so this becomes the photosynthetic, that is the these ones, or chemical reactions. Chemical reactions, the chemosynthesis. As I told you in the beginning, that producers they can produce the food by photosynthesis or by chemosynthesis, and therefore primary productivity is defined as the rate at which energy is stored by organism in organic matter using energy derived from solar radiation during photosynthesis or chemical reaction. So let us look at this simplified photosynthetic reaction. This reaction states that in the presence of light energy, which is being absorbed by the photosynthesizing organism, water combines with carbon dioxide to give us sugar and oxygen. And this sugar over here, it is the organ. This sugar, it is a packet of energy. So what is happening? By absorbing light energy, the primary producers, while doing photosynthesis, are converting that energy in form of organic matter and storing it there. And opposite of this is respiration. It's just the reverse reaction, where you can see that oxygen, when we respire or any organism respires, the uh, oxygen reacts with that sugar or that glucose, and then it breaks it down to release water, carbon dioxide, and heat energy is released in the form of ATP. So the representative reaction chemically, it is 6H2O plus 6CO2 plus light energy. It is photosynthesis. It gives 6H12O6 plus 6O2. And C6H12O6 plus 6O gives uh, H2O plus CO2 plus heat energy in the process as respiration. So the primary productivity, which is achieved by both photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. So this, which you are seeing it right here, this is in the where light can come in, and mostly phytoplanktons are responsible for the photosynthesis. So the word phytos means plants and microscopic plants, and planktons means floater. So these are all those floating micro algae which the photosynthesis. But the second way, as to how the second way of primary productivity can happen, it is the chemosynthesis. So the general reaction for chemosynthesis, it is 6H2S hydrogen sulfide plus 6H2 6CO plus 6O. This gives us C6H12O6 plus H2SO4, 6H2SO. So if we see this reaction here, first of all, you should know that chemosynthesis cannot be done by phytoplasm. Because this process happens at the in the deep sea where there is no light, so there is no question of phytoplanktons existing there. So chemosynthesis is done by microscopic archaea. It's a very primitive organisms, primitive unicellular organisms which resemble bacteria but have chemical similarities to multicellular. Okay, so this is not typically done by bacteria but by archaea. And chemosynthesis normally occurs at hydrothermal vents in the deep sea. So if we look at this reaction, where from this H2S comes? This H2S and these other seafloor chemicals, they are present in the deeps because from the hydrothermal vents, constant uh, upwelling of the material from deep earth comes out consisting of a lot of sulfides, and this hydrogen sulfide over there reacts with, so hydrogen sulfide is given by the hydrothermal vents, water is all around it, CO2 is dissolved in the ocean, O2 though less in quantity but it's also dissolved in the ocean. So what does it give? It again gives C6H12O6, that is the sugar or glucose and organic. So this organic matter is again fed by the others which use it up for their purposes, and therefore this is how the chain starts. Now let us come back to the important one, that is the photosynthesis. So the photosynthetic efficiency efficiency, it depends on how the light energy is absorbed by the plants. Depends on absorption light energy, how it is absorbed by the plant. So it has been calculated that use 1 mole of CO, one, approximately 8 to 10 photons are used. 10 photons are used. In the visible range is, when we say visible light, I mean we are talking about 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers wavelength. The visible light is also referred to as photosynthetically active radiation. So these 8-10 photons in the visible light, these 8 to 10 moles of photons, it consists of approximately 381 kilocalorie. Okay, so to use 1 mole of CO2, 8 to 10 moles of photons are used, and those 8 to 10 moles of photon approximately consist of 381 kilocalories of energy. And to convert 1 mole of CO2, 1 mole of CO2 goes approximately 140 kilocalorie energy is used. Okay, 114 kilocalorie energy is used. So what happens here? Availability is 381 kilocalorie, but actually being used is 114. So how much percentage of available light energy is being used? 114 divided by 381 in 100, it comes to approximately 29.9% or 30%. So you can see that the theoretically only 30% is being of the available light energy is being used in photosynthesis, right? So you can understand now that had the entire energy been used, then what would have been the photosynthetic efficiency? This is the theoretical way, but in actual sunlight, in the actual sunlight, only 45% of the light is the photosynthetically active spectrum. So in the whole sunlight, which is in that electromagnetic spectrum ranges from cosmic rays to the longer wavelengths. I'll show you a diagram in a bit. So that light consists of only 45% of visible, which I just said that it is the photosynthetically active spectrum. So what happens is that theoretical maximum efficiency of solar energy is approximate. Solar energy conversion is approximately 11%. So theoretically, 11% of the available light energy should be converted to glucose. But in reality, the maximum overall photosynthetic efficiency is hardly 3 to 6% of the total solar wind. You can understand that we the amount of energy, light energy, which is coming on there, 3 to 6% of that is efficiently being used by the primary producers. Okay, so the this is the overall scenario for the photosynthetic efficiency. Now, what are the factors that affect the? Okay, so this is what I was talking about. If you see this diagram over here, the entire electromagnetic spectrum, it is ranging from the cosmic rays, very long wavelength radiation, and the visible ranges from 400 to 700 nanometers. Okay, we will be coming to this diagram again. Let me add a few more slides here. Right. So, what are the factors that affect the primary growth? There are normally two factors. Okay, first factor is availability of, and second factor is availability of solar radiation. Okay, now how and why these factors they govern the primary productivity? Let us first discuss the availability of nutrients. When we say we are talking about the nutrients in the marine real or the ocean water, then normally these nutrients are nitrates, they are nitrates, phosphates, then silicon in form of silica. These are the most important uh, nutrients which are needed by phytoplanktons. So these nutrients, that is nitrates, nitrogen in form of nitrates, phosphorus in form of phosphates, and silicon in form of silica, they are also referred to as biolimiting, means they control the population or the concentration of phytoplanktons which are essential for primary production. Now, what happens here is that these nutrients, they which is the biggest source of these nutrients? The biggest source of these nutrients, they are continents. How? These continents are eroded by river. Continents are eroded by river runoff, and these uh, materials, these nutrients, they are deposited near the continental mountains. Okay, these river runoff deposits the nutrients near continent margins. Now you can imagine that since the continents are the source of these nutrients and the material is being deposited near the continental margins, therefore the greatest concentration of marine life greatest concentration marine life is found along continental margins. I hope you understood this. Continent. Okay. Nitrogen and phosphorus, they are the most important limiting elements, most important for the production of phytoplanktons. These are the most important limiting elements. Carbon does not limit productivity. You should remember that. Carbon does not limit productivity because it is present in great quantities in oceans. So, when the nutrients are not limiting productivity, means under the normal circumstances, under the normal circumstances, when the nutrients are not limiting productivity, they are optimum conditions. Then what happens? Then the ratio of carbon to nitrogen to phosphorus, which is uh, observed in the tissues of algae, it is in the ratio of 106, 16. So the ratio of C and P shows a proportion of 106 to 16 1, and most of us know that this is called as Redfield ratio. Sometimes questions on Redfield ratio have been asked in the net exam. Okay. So what is the Redfield ratio? This ratio is it gives us the values of of the proportions of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And when the nutrients are not limiting, means when it is the optimum conditions, not unusual conditions, then this ratio is observed in tissues of algae in the ratio in the proportion of 106 to 16 to 1. Now, the zooplanktons which eat those algae, this ratio passes on to them as well. So, this ratio is also observed in zooplankton that feed on these algae. Okay. Now, when the phytoplanktons take the nutrients in the ratio in which they are available in the ocean, so this ratio might change in the ocean. So, Redfield ratio means only this one, but this ratio might not always be found. So, whatever ratio is present in the ocean, when the phytoplanktons they make up their bodies, their tests or their shells, they take up the nutrients in the ratio which is available, and the same ratio is passed on to zooplanktons. So when these organisms die, the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus are restored in the ocean water in the same ratio. Okay. So if in the ocean water the ratio of carbon to nitrogen to phosphorus is 106 to 16 to 1, and if the phytoplanktons they form their exoskeleton or their bodies during that time, or their not even exoskeleton, their entire cell during that time, so they will take up this ratio, and once they take up this ratio and they are eaten by the zooplankton, this ratio passes on to them. And when everything, the phytoplanktons and zooplanktons, they die, the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus are recycled to the ocean water in the same ratio. So I hope you understood this. Other than carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, another important element is iron. Very, very important. This is also important for primary productivity. So remember that if iron concentration is low, then photosynthetic production will be low. So why is iron important? The iron is important for several reasons. Let us see them one by one. So first thing is iron is important because it helps in chlorophyll synthesis. Chlorophyll synthesis. Iron is important because, sorry, Iron is important because it serves as cofactor. It serves as cofactor for several enzymes where in the chloroplast and these enzymes are important because they are involved in the electron transfer and energy transfer. Then iron is also important because it is critical for electron transport chain. Electron transport chain. And why is this chain important? Because this chain helps in the conversion of light energy to chemical energy. Okay. Then iron also helps to maintain chloroplast stability. Okay. You can see how many important roles this plays. So the first factor was the availability of. So I hope you understood that if the nutrients are higher, they will help in the higher concentration of phytoplanktons. If the phytoplanktons are higher in their concentration, they will be helpful for the photosynthesis and the photosynthetic efficiency will increase. Now the second factor, the availability of solar radiation. Okay, I'll add a few more slides here. Now let us see how the availability of solar radiation is important for photosynthesis. Okay. If we talk about the atmosphere, the solar light, solar radiation, it can penetrate up to the whole thickness of the atmosphere. So atmosphere is approximately 80 kilometers thick, but at the same time, atmosphere is transparent. So this transparency, it allows the sunlight to penetrate. So this transparency allows sunlight to penetrate. All right. So this penetration of the sunlight, it provides ample and adequate solar radiation for photosynthesis on the land. But in the oceans, even even when the ocean is clearest with least turbidity, the sunlight can penetrate only up to 1 kilometers in the oceans. The water in the oceans is impenetrable beyond a maximum depth of 1 kilometer. Therefore, the uh, sunlight is inadequate. It is too inadequate for photosynthesis in the oceans. As a result, the photosynthesis in the oceans is restricted to the surface waters. Surface waters and also the areas of sea floor. Areas of sea floor where light can penetrate. So you can understand that the sea floor regions where the light can penetrate might definitely be only in the shallow regions, shallow waters. Okay, which means that now if we try to draw a diagram over here of the ocean water column. So this is the sun. The solar radiation falls on the ocean water column. It is given it some the depth shallow to, let us say, make it 2 kilometers. Okay. Under normal circumstances, this solar radiation can penetrate up to a very, very shallow depth if we are in the coastal regions or in the shallow zones. The surface water receives maximum percentage of this solar radiation. And I have just said that even though the ocean is clearest, it cannot penetrate beyond 1 kilometer. So there is no solar radiation beyond this depth, which means that provided all the conditions are ideal, there will be no photosynthesis beyond 1 kilometer. But of course, it doesn't go that deep. So we now get a depth beyond which there is no photosynthesis. So the depth beyond which no photosynthesis occurs, this depth is called as the compensation depth for photosynthesis. Compensation depth for photosynthesis. Now, in the euphotic zone, which extends from the surface to compensation depth for photosynthesis, okay, the euphotic zone, which extends from the surface. So, if let us say this is the compensation depth, so this zone will be called as euphotic zone. In open ocean, this euphotic zone on an average is 100 meters. Average. And in the coastal regions, which are near to the coast, it is less than 20 meters. 100 meters, I am not talking about the photosynthetic efficiency or photosynthesis rate. I am only telling you right now about the euphotic zone. In open ocean, the euphotic zone is deeper because it has relatively clear waters. In the shallow region, the waters are very, very turbid. As a result, they do not allow the deeper penetration of the ocean, of the solar radiation. So as we go from the coastal regions to the open ocean. So let us draw a plot here. So we found out that for primary productivity, two factors were important: availability of nutrients and availability of solar radiation. Now, if you are near the coast and you go away from the coast towards the open ocean, two things will change. We just saw that due to turbidity, the sunlight penetrates to a lesser distance in the coastal regions. As a result, we have lesser solar radiation. And in the open ocean, due to clearer waters, we have more solar radiation. But what about nutrients? So let us first see if this is the solar radiation. What about nutrients? Previously, we studied that due to continental runoff by the rivers, continental erosion by the river runoff, maximum nutrients are dumped or deposited in the coastal region. So nutrient availability becomes lower as you go away from the coast. Now you can understand that the water transparency is important, but at the same time, it is also important how much nutrients are available. Okay, so if we look at this diagram, this is a very important diagram. What does it suggest? As the sunlight falls on the surface of all visible light falling on the ocean surface, only 45% remains by the time the light penetrates to a depth of 1 meter. Once the penetration goes on and it goes up to 10 meters, 16% of energy remains out of the total which falls on the surface. And once it reaches 100 meters, it's only 1% of the energy that falls on the surface. Which means that as you go deeper, the amount of energy available for use, the solar radiation, becomes much less. And by 100 meters, it's only 1% of what is achieved. So, transparency of water becomes important. How to know about the transparency of the ocean water? We have we have equipment or an instrument which is known as the Secchi disk. The Secchi disk, it is an equipment that is used for the measurement of transparency of the water. Secchi disk is lowered in the water, and then scientists can measure the transparency there. So this flat disk that you are seeing over here, it is called as the Secchi disk. All right. What is the color of the water in the oceans, and how you can identify it? So if we look at the color of the water in the ocean, it ranges from indigo, it is blue in color, to yellowish green. Yellowish green. But remember, this is not the true color of the water. So the color of the ocean, it is influenced by two factors. First one is, what is the amount of turbidity which is observed in the water? Turbidity means the suspended particles. Okay, the suspended particles, what are those which are present in the ocean? And second thing, what is the amount of photosynthetic pigment present in them? That is chlorophyll. What is the amount of chlorophyll, and what is the amount of turbidity that is present in the oceans? The amount of photosynthetic pigment increases with biological production. So if you look at this satellite image of the ocean chlorophyll, you can see that majority of the coastal regions, they are showing yellow to green. This yellowish green color is because of the higher chlorophyll amount. And why this chlorophyll is high over there? It is because the production of algae is higher. The phytoplanktons, they are higher in these regions. So these phytoplanktons in the coastal areas, why they are high? Because the nutrient content in the coastal waters, it is high. And if we look at in the equatorial zone, you can see slightly yellowish green color. The reason is the upwelling zones. The equatorial upwelling zone also has higher nutrient. So whenever nutrient concentration will be higher, it will lead to the higher productivity, higher production of the phytoplanktons, which are the uh, photosynthetic organisms consisting of chlorophyll. So all these regions, they will be having higher uh, chlorophyll content, and as a result, the color in these regions of ocean water will be yellowish green. But if you go towards the open ocean, it lacks productivity but also lacks turbidity. So here it is appearing as indigo blue in color. And This indigo blue in color is because water molecules scatter the blue wavelength the most, and chlorophyll molecules they disperse the they scatter the greenish and yellowish light the most. So the color of the ocean also tells us about how much biological productivity is happening in which regions. So I just said that the margins of oceans are rich in life. So if you look at the open ocean, in the open ocean, the stability is higher. Why? Because the shallower portions, if you look at my video on waves and tides, then you would come to know that the open ocean is more stable than the coastal regions because they are continuously eroded, they are continuously hit by tides and waves, etc. Still, the open ocean does not have a richest concentration of marine organisms. Okay. Reason is that the open oceans they lack the nutrients, and this lack of nutrients it causes the less biological production. As I in the previous slide I just said that the coastal regions they are also rich in the uh, nutrient content. Now, how does this nutrient content increase in the coastal regions? You all are aware about the coastal upwelling. So, if you see here this rectangle on the western coast of Africa in the Benguela current region, you can see that due to the coastal upwelling, which uh, brings the deep cold water through upwelling to replace the surface water, the uh, conditions of nutrients get enhanced. This enhanced nutrient content in the coastal regions is the primary cause for increase in the primary productivity, and therefore the chlorophyll concentration is much higher in the coastal zones and of course in the equatorial zones. So what are the photosynthetic marine organisms commonly found in the oceans? If you look at the shallow regions, you will get surf grass. So these names, Phyllospedix, probably this question has been asked in the net exam some time back. Green surf grass, which is a photosynthetic marine organism. Then macroscopic, big algae, that is brown algae, the sargassum. Then uh, macrocystis. After that, green algae, cordium, and then red algae. All these algae are big algae. You don't need a microscope to see them. So this is the macroscopic algae. So sea surf grass and macroscopic algae. Other than that, the microscopic algae, it has diatoms, then it has uh, coccolithophores, then it has dinoflagellates. They are all photosynthetic. Other than that, sometimes you get golden algae that are chrysophytes. Then there are photosynthetic bacteria as very commonly found photosynthetic bacteria in the marine real. This is Prochlorococcus. It does the it is the most abundant and the smallest of the marine phytoplanktons. It also does photosynthesis. Then see how algae floats in the ocean water. So this red tide in the ocean is actually caused by the red algae. I'd like to show you an example of symbiosis. Look at this picture. This was taken by me while doing the scanning electron microscopy of samples from the Agulhas current region. This is a planktic foraminifera. Planktic foraminifera has a lot of these pits and pores on its surface. If you see here carefully, you will find this. This is a coccolithophore, calcareous nanofossil plankton. So calcareous nanofossil. In this case, it is calcareous nanofossil. These nanofossils they get to live in the pores of foraminifera. And see, they are huge in them, these phytoplanktons. So I have zoomed it for. This is a typical case of symbiosis where the zooplankton, that is foraminifera, provides support and habitat for these algae. And in turn, these primary producers provide them by doing photosynthesis. Now let us come to the variation in the regional primary product. Okay, so let me add one more slide here. All right. So let us now look at the variation in the regional primary primary. All right. The typical unit of photosynthetic production, it is measured in gram carbon per meter square per year. And the range for photosynthetic productivity in the ocean is from 1 gram carbon per meter square per year to 4,000 gram carbon per meter square per year. And by the going by the previous discussion, you can very easily uh, say that this lower photosynthetic productivity, primary productivity, will be in the open ocean, while this very high will be in the coastal regions. All right. So why does this happen? It is because of the uneven distribution of nutrients and seasonal changes in the availability of solar energy. Okay. Now, about 90% of the biomass, approximately 90% of biomass, which is produced in the euphotic zone, which is produced in the euphotic zone of open ocean, it gets decomposed. Okay, 90% of biomass of the euphotic zone of open ocean, it decomposes. And once it is decomposed, it forms these inorganic nutrients only, the nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon. So the inorganic nutrients. And after the euphotic zone, once it goes down, only 10% of only 10% of organic matter, it goes to the deeper zone. So as this 10% of organic matter it sinks, out of this 10%, again 9% decomposes. So what happens? How much is remaining? Only 1%. And where does this 1% go? It goes to get accumulated on the sea. So if we try to make a diagram out of it, so let us say that this is the open ocean surface, open ocean, and let us presume that this this is the euphotic zone. Euphotic zone. Now, these are the phytoplanktons which are formed in the euphotic zone, and they will be high over there because of the high nutrient content. Of the, yes, of course, relatively higher nutrient content and the well lit conditions. So they die and 90% gets decomposed. Here 90% is decomposed. So once the remaining organic matter sinks, you have only 10% of organic. And once they reach the sea floor, once they come and get accumulated on the sea floor, it is only 1%. Sorry. It is only 1%. 9% gets used. Okay. So this process of removing material from euphotic zone to the sea floor, it is called as biological pump. Called as biological pump. All right. Other than that, there are some more factors which are important for the primary productivity, and in those factors, two layers are very the permanent thermocline and resulting picto. So, how do these two uh, play their role in the primary productivity? We know that the thermocline and pycnocline, they act as barriers and they do not allow the deep water, which is rich in nutrients, to mix easily with the nutrient poor surface waters. Okay, so wherever wherever on the earth there is a permanent thermocline, there the surface productivity will be lower because these layers they act as barriers in mixing. Where the permanent thermocline is not there, the waters they can easily mix. So, for example, if you look at the polar regions, temperate regions, and the tropical regions they have a well developed permanent thermocline. So, in the tropical regions, the waters, the nutrient rich deeper waters do not mix with the surface waters. So, the nutrient availability in the tropical regions in the surface water is very. In the polar oceans, the permanent thermocline is not there. So it's almost an isothermal situation. So the lack of this thermocline in the polar regions allows free mixing, and therefore the polar surface waters are high in nutrients. So you will be finding higher productivity, higher primary productivity in the polar regions. But when we look at the temperate regions, in the temperate regions, there is the concept of the seasonal thermoclines. And here in the mid latitudes, the thermocline develops only when there is summer season in the mid latitudes. As a result, this variation in the thermocline depth also impacts productivity. So, if we look at the productivity in the polar oceans, if you see in the Arctic region, the Barents Sea productivity, when during the winter seasons, that is the from December to March, the sunlight is not there, it's almost completely dark. So even though the nutrients are high, productivity of diatoms, which is the primary producers or the phytoplanktons, it's very low. But when we look at the month of March onwards, when the sunlight starts to fall on the ocean water, so this is the springtime. During the springtime, you can see there is a bloom of diatoms, very high productivity of diatoms, because nutrients are already there and suddenly more sunlight has now been made available. In the month of May, when the productivity of diatoms is higher, immediately during the late April and May, to eat those phytoplanktons, the zooplankton also increases. So you can see that during the spring season, the phytoplankton biomass increases, and during the summer season, the zooplankton biomass increases. And both of these start to fall again during the fall time of the year when the sunlight starts to reduce. This is in the Barents Sea in the Arctic. Look at the second diagram, that is Antarctic region. It has been observed that Antarctica has higher productivity than Arctic. The reason is that the North Atlantic deep water, which sinks in the North Atlantic, and then that is the precursor for the global thermohaline circulation, when it upwells near the coast of Antarctica, it brings a lot of nutrients to the surface. So the surface productivity in the Antarctic region is higher because it gets higher concentration of nutrients. And of course, the concept of the availability of solar radiation, it applies here as well. third diagram, which when you look at the typical temperature, polar temperature profile, you will see almost an isothermal water. So the density and temperature change very little with depth in the polar region. Okay, because these waters are isothermal, which means that there is no thermal, so there is no mixing and there is high nutrient conditions. But in the polar regions, although the nutrient content is higher, but sunlight, the solar radiation is not available adequately. Therefore, in the polar regions, solar energy becomes limiting factor for primary. I hope you understood. When we look at the tropical oceans, then this is a difference. The tropical oceans have low productivity because you can see there is a permanent thermocline. This does not allow the cold, nutrient rich deep water to mix freely with the warm, nutrient depleted surface. As a result, here, even though the solar energy is available in enough quantities, here the limiting factor now becomes nutrient availability. In case of polar regions, nutrient was available. What was not available? Solar energy. In tropical regions, solar energy is available, nutrient is not available. Of course, there are some exceptions in the regions of equatorial upwelling, coastal upwelling, and coral reef, where the nutrients are higher and the uh, adequate sunlight is also there. We get good primary product. An interesting case scenario is the productivity in the temperate ocean. Now, this plot might look a very complex thing to you, but it's not that difficult. And this, the June 2016 NET exam MCQs, this diagram was given as such, and it was asked which latitudinal zone in the oceans does this diagram represent for? So its answer will be the temperate ocean. So what happens here? During winters, that is during December to March, if you look at the lower panel of this diagram, you can see that during winters, the solar light which is incident on the surface is very slanting. Means the incident, you know that the angle of incidence and angle of reflection, they both are same. So the angle at which the solar energy falls on the surface of the ocean, same way it gets reflected. So the availability of solar energy is very. Therefore, during the winter months, the productivity is extremely low, even though the nutrients are higher. If you look at this plot, the nutrients are higher during the winter months, but due to the lack of sunlight, the orange color plot is the sunlight. Due to lack of this, what do you get? You get the uh, low primary productivity. Okay. If you look at the spring season, that is March to June, here now the sunlight is not as slanting, it is penetrating a bit more. So there is now starting to be development of a line. But here the spring of the spring bloom of phytoplankton happens. The reason is that there are nutrients also and now enough sunlight also. So during the month of March, you can see that phytoplankton peak is there. That is called as spring bloom. Very high concentration of phytoplankton. This creates a huge demand for nutrients in the euphotic zone, and therefore after the after the spring season, there is a very sharp decline. So if you see the month of April, there is a very sharp decline in the primary productivity. But but if you look at the zooplanktons, here what has happened? Here the uh, the zooplanktons have suddenly started to grow in numbers. So during the spring season, phytoplanktons bloom, and towards the end of spring season, the phytoplankton concentration drops while zooplankton increases. Now, During the uh, summer season, what happens here is that June to September, if you look at June to September, the summer season shows the lowest productivity. Why? Means not lowest, sorry, it's lower than the winter. So why the very low productivity during the summer season? Because now vertical sun rays, you can see in the lower diagram that enough sunlight is now penetrating. As a result, there is development of a strong thermal. Then this thermocline stops the mixing. So even though sufficient solar energy is available, the nutrient concentration goes. As a result, now the productivity is hampered. But if you again look at the fall season from September to December, now the fall season has diminished solar radiation because sun is again moving lower in the sky. So when the solar radiation becomes lesser, now that strong line also starts getting diminished, which means there is more mixing. Wind velocity increases, causing the nutrient-rich layers to mix with the surface water, and enough light, not as adequate as summer, but enough sunlight is available. So you have again a bloom of phytoplankton that is called as fall bloom. So if you look at this whole temperate ocean scenario, during the winters and summers, almost no productivity. But during spring, you have the spring bloom of phytoplanktons, and during the fall bloom of phytoplanktons, because during the spring season, the nutrient availability and solar radiation availability both are there adequately. And then same thing happens during the fall season, but of course not as high as the spring season. So once you compare in the northern hemisphere, if you compare the tropical, temperate, and the polar regions, so tropical regions always have the lowest productivity entire year. The reason is because of the permanent thermal. If you look at the temperate regions in the northern hemisphere, during the months of March, April, and September and October, you will get peaks of phytoplankton. But the polar regions, they show the phytoplankton blooms during the summer months because during the summer months enough light is available and it helps the brief. So I hope you understood all these concepts of variation in the uh, biomass production. Remember, whenever the biomass production will be higher, it will always increase the photosynthetic efficiency. In the next lecture, I shall be talking about the energy transfer systems in the ocean. Thank you so much. And try to read this. All these diagrams are from the book Essentials of Oceanography by Trujillo and Thurman. Beautiful diagrams they have given. I hope if you go through that chapter, it will help. Thank you so much. See you soon in the next class.